So, Resident Evil. This will be the first
Yes.
video in a fantastic series we're starting. So each week we'll be reviewing the amazing
loose term,
quality,
fantastic.
quality series known as Resident Evil. Classic movies. I hear especially the fourth one is meant to be really good. So looking forward to that.
Disgusting. Absolute filth. So, okay. A bit of context, guys. So we were meant to be just reviewing the first film. That's what we're doing today. We're just reviewing the first film in the series. I thought we were reviewing the whole series in like a single massive video. Now, I was up to the fourth one last night, and I told Blaine, I'm like, I can't do it, man. I'm 10 minutes into the fourth one, and I've had to take a break, okay? This is too much for me to handle. And he's like, dude, we're doing the first one. I'm like, I thought we were doing and I felt like the biggest dunce. And imagine that, my punishment for actually sitting through and watching multiple Resident Evil movies in 1 week is to be told, oh, by the way, no. Oh, that's my punishment, watching the first 10 movies. This is a special kind of hell. This is a very special type of hell.
I mean, this whole play, that would make sense,
Anyway.
actually, being locked down, being forced to watch Resident Evil movies without being able to see anyone.
This was a terrible idea on my
That's a
behalf.
version of hell.
Why did I do this?
So Resident Evil, the first one, is a classic 2002 movie, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. And the story follows an elite group of commando soldiers who have to infiltrate this genetic research cell after a particular event happens in the first 10 minutes of the film. And we follow their story and the horrors and trials they have to go through to get through this. This is a very
So Resident Evil, obviously based off of the video games. It's got, zombies, and that's kind of what that thing is. And I mean, I don't really care about spoiling that in the first sort of. You go into this film thinking it's a zombie film. So yeah, basically this film follows the commandos, and it also follows the protagonist is named Alice in this film, who's not from the games.
Okay, so Alice is something completely original.
Yes, Alice is completely original, and I think the majority of the characters are original as well, as far as I'm aware.
I don't think the films are the greatest representation of the video games, from what I've heard.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The two separate entities. I mean, there's a couple. Obviously, there's the Umbrella Corporation. In the video games, and in the movies as well. They're pretty much like the main, I guess, antagonist sort of corporation. In this film, they're not really there, I guess. I mean, you can feel their presence, but you don't think, okay, you're up against the Umbrella Corporation. You're not up against them. You're up against, in this film, it's definitely, it's a zombie film.
Yeah. You don't realize how, the film doesn't really show us how evil this corporation is. You just mentioned it.
I mean, you can definitely see a hint of it when it's their lab that created zombies. I mean, that's a pretty bad move from the start. So I mean, you don't see them at the absolute peak evilness, I guess.
Well, it's probably the wise move if you have to choose which one evil to focus on. You want to focus more on the zombies.
Yeah, definitely. And in this film, it just kind of, it seems more like a very horrible scenario rather than everyone's sort of, you're up against, the biggest company in the world and they're evil and taking over. It's very much a small scale thing, which I very much liked, to be honest with this film.
It definitely does create that sense of isolation that these characters are trapped in this small, location, and there's a struggle to get through it. Feels like they're trapped, and you get that sense of they're trapped in this movie.
Yeah, definitely. I think a couple of things I will kind of say that are positives in this film. I feel that in terms of the first half of the film, I felt was I wouldn't say it was decently focused. in terms of like it's a very you very clearly can see, okay, this is what's going on.
Yes.
Alice she
Yeah.
has amnesia in this, but there's these commandos. They're going in to investigate what's happened here in this facility.
Yeah, I would say this film does a very good job in setting up what's happened and what's going to happen.
Definitely, yeah. Like again, like in terms of like its setup and in terms of just creating atmosphere, I actually felt like this film did quite well.
Yeah, I can see that. I'll definitely say there is a potential for a really good film here. The story is quite solid, and the characters, they're not the most fleshed out or well developed.
They're serviceable. Like
they're
the side
serviceable.
characters do the job and not much else.
Yeah. So there is some really good bits in this. There's hints of something really good in this movie. And every now and then there's a scene.
It's a good film and it's trying to claw itself out, but then there's just Paul W.S. Anderson who doesn't know what he's really doing. And it's more so apparent in later films. There's potential, and that's it. Like
it's a film you turn your brain off and you just watch as background noise that can be entertaining if you've got nothing to do.
You can kind of watch it. It's I think better like if you're a little bit younger, to be honest. You try and
Probably
watch
is more
it like a bit older, then it's a bit you won't enjoy it as much.
But yeah, flaws are very noticeable when you do see it. There are some solid action scenes that do demonstrate how good this film could have been. I mean, I really like the laser death scene in the movie.
Yes.
I think it's about halfway through the film or something. There's commandos.
No, it was literally like not even. It was
Not
like
halfway.
The first,
It was in the
not even
first
30 minutes.
first 30, 40 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, it's definitely like the first act, and that was probably where the film is sort of at its peak, I feel.
Yeah.
This is before we even see any zombies, and this is like purely the Red Queen still trying to contain the situation, sort of thing. And by contain, I mean sort of keep other people out and have like self-defense sort of system.
Yeah. And it's really clever in how it gets through people. It's self-aware. It knows what's going on. The Red Queen or whatever.
Yeah. One thing I did appreciate was like the camera work for the most part, and the in regards to the action scenes, it did feel very much like in the Resident Evil games, how like especially like in the old ones, how there's like the fixed camera angles. A lot of scenes they really it made it feel like more claustrophobic. The action, which I really like. Again, you can sort of see hints of like almost like a horror film, or like a thriller sort of thing there. But there's just too much dumb shit to kind of.
There's too much going on at once, and it isn't entirely focused on the one thing. It's trying to do multiple things at once, even if the basis is pretty good.
Yeah. Again, like when it wants, I feel like when it wants to be focused on certain things, then it does shine. But then when it starts to sort of branch off and do its own thing and introduce other side plots, then it's kind of on the messy side. It doesn't really juggle all of them very well.
It's a bit convoluted at times in how it treats its storylines and plot lines. And while there are some very suspenseful moments, they do, as you haven't mentioned this bit yet, it's relatively suspenseful for a time until they get to a certain moment in the film. And
I'll really go into it because I think I had more issue with this scene than you did.
Yeah, I think you
and I think the reason why I find it more apparent is because I had to sit through the other 3 films and then the beginning of the 4th, and that's when it's really just bonkers. So again, I'm in the beginning. I mentioned Alice, how she's the main protagonist of this film. It doesn't really focus too much on her for the most part until it decides that it really wants to. And I think because the big part of that is because Paul W.S. Anderson is actually married to Alice, played by Mila Jovovich. So they're actually married. So I think it's,
I do think
kind of wanted her to be with that.
It did kind of seem like at times the film lacked a main character. It was kind of focusing on everyone else and didn't really have that lead until later on.
Yeah.
Finally decided
I agree.
It was.
And what happened? Now, you discover in the film about halfway. So, in this film, I mean, Alice, she was obviously in the mansion. She suffers from amnesia, but then you kind of see that she starts to piece together her past a little bit throughout this film, and then you discover that she used to work for, or she works for the Umbrella Corporation, and basically she's a badass, basically more than the like special ops that are there, and that really just goes way too far really quickly in a certain scene about maybe halfway through the film.
Yeah,
involving the zombie dogs. This is so ridiculous that I kind of have to mention it. This exact point is what ruins the film. So we discover that Alice, is basically a badass when she's up in a tiny. She's basically running away from one zombie dog. She locks herself in a room to get away from that dog, and then she fly kicks like a zombie that was like. And then she was in this room with a zombie. She easily kills it. And then the dog jumps through a window into that same room with the zombie, the tiny room that she used to escape. She then runs back outside, and there's another 7 zombie dogs. She then pulls out her gun and shoots all 7 of them in their head without missing once, like an absolute superhuman. The last dog literally runs up a wall, jump roundhouse kicks that dog in its head, snaps its neck. The most absurd thing.
That reminds me, Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World, how everyone makes fun of that scene where the little girl fly kicks the Velociraptor and kills it.
Mm.
Yeah, it reminds me of that. It's that similar ridiculousness, and
now that you mention it, yeah.
It's similarly stupid.
Yeah, but that's it's that point in the film where basically
where they jump the shark.
Alice, it's that part of the film where Alice goes from 0 to hero so quick. I feel.
I would say the character development of all the characters is very weak in this movie, and when it does decide to change its characters, it's like at the snap of a finger. It doesn't really have that hero's journey in which the characters need to take the proper steps in which they slowly evolve into who they
become. There's not much of a character arc for really anyone.
No. I'm going to use Luke Skywalker as a good example of someone who goes from just a farm boy to badass who blows up an entire spaceship and becomes a galactic hero being. You see the slow changes as the movie goes past, and it's completely believable. But had he been the same farm boy at the beginning of the film, and then suddenly he destroys the Death Star, that would have been unbelievable.
Yeah, and this film, it definitely does that.
There's no proper growth.
Yeah, and some characters are relatively static, which is fine in this film. They have very limited character arcs. It's literally just, from one extreme to the other. I think if you can't nail the main character in a film like this, then the film just sort of doesn't work. And that's why the first half of the film is so good, and then the second half just doesn't work quite as well.
I felt like the first half of the film was more an ensemble, of each different character they were sharing the story, and then the second half decides to do a 180, and it's like, nope, this is whose story it is. This is the person that matters. Kind of comes out of nowhere.
I'm not saying that there's no reason that Alice shouldn't be a badass, but they just needed to just give that whole thing just a bit more time in the oven.
It's completely believable under the circumstances that she would develop into a badass. It just isn't developed properly enough. It's like the sudden snap of a finger. You should show her slowly learning as the film develops as she's thrown into these situations.
So some parts of this film are fantastic, and it's just frustrating. I feel it's enjoyable, but then there are some parts it's like, what the hell? It stands out. It's kind of like it goes from being, like I said, like a suspenseful sort of horror film, or like a suspenseful sort of movie, and then all of a sudden it just goes to Just Cause.
I feel like this film itself isn't sure what it is. Is it a horror film? Is it a thriller? Or is it an action piece? It's kind of jumps around between each one of them and doesn't know which one to particularly settle on. It has elements of horror. It has elements
and
they can all work together really well if done properly. It's just They don't
Yeah.
seem to even that out properly.
It just doesn't fit in properly. It's like a puzzle piece that should fit in, but just doesn't.
Like, I was thinking of the raid films, and I kind of see some of the similarities where a group of commandos raids an isolated building, in this case.
Yeah.
But that film does a very good job in, in managing the thrills and the action with the whole elements that are going on, while this film just isn't sure where to settle on. It's more jumping around.
Imagine going from, like, again, like, if you know of, let's say, like, the Resident Evil games, or, like, let's say, you know, a horror in a sort of like a mansion. I'm trying to think, like, another example of that. But like let's say, like, a decent horror film, like, not spectacular, but it kind of like, let's say, a decent horror, like decent suspenseful sort of thing, and then it jumps to Aliens, Colonial Marines, if you know what that is.
Yeah.
Jump, and it's very jarring. And what are some other points we kind of were talking about before? I'm thinking. Yeah, so we mentioned. Okay.
I think it's just the soundtrack and sound effects, which were.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's what I'm going to talk about. The sounds, not very good.
No, the soundtrack does have a very early 2000s feel to it, and it is quite a bit dated. And the sound effects as a whole, the action swooshing effects, very cliched.
Yeah.
And again, hasn't aged well. You can this whole film, you can really tell it was an early 2000s.
Like, real try-hardy.
Yeah.
I guess, like, in the special effects, we didn't really mention that, but while we're talking about like the sound and everything, also kind of move on to special effects.
Oh yeah.
Everything that's practical, like, I mean, like, in regards to, like, some of the special effects, I think were very well done, to be honest, especially considering it wasn't like a huge, but it was like, what, 32 million, I think you mentioned.
Yeah, it was 32 million and made 110 million back, so it's pretty good return.
Yeah, so exactly. So it's not certainly, did well, quite well, or relatively speaking, anyway. But I think definitely, I mean, with the exception of like one or two things that really stood out, I feel like for the most part the special effects were quite well done. There was a lot of practical effects, like that laser scene that we mentioned before. That was all awesome.
It's a bit of a weird combination of some really good effects, and then there's some not so good effects. It's like I feel like they had to prioritize the ones that were more front and center, which I understand.
Yeah, but then like, you look at it and it, like, it really notices. Like, you don't notice it until you do.
Yeah.
And then when you notice it, you can't stop. So.
I think the general set design was actually pretty good for a film with such a small budget. The isolated setting did help.
But I think it kind of worked because, again, and I feel like you kind of notice more with the later films as well, how when there's there's a higher budget, it seems to kind of expand out and it doesn't work as well. But with this, the claustrophobia really worked. The set design was actually pretty well done.
The claustrophobia, the isolation, it does help create some sense of tensions for these characters as they're trying to make their way. It kind of does feel like they're, I guess, a bit like the video game where they have to move through each level, move through the building.
Yeah, like, the camera work is very well done. So, some of the set design pretty well done as well. I don't have really any huge faults there. I don't have any complaints.
No. Overall, I think the film it's nothing great. It's nothing exceptional, but it's okay.
Yeah, I would give it a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I was leaning towards a 6 as well.
Yeah, because I think it's not a fantastic film, but you can see elements of like a great one in there.
It's a film. A film with a lot of potential, but probably under a more competent director than Paul W.S. Anderson could have been a really good movie.
Anything else to add?
Not today. Just thanks for watching and subscribe.
Make sure you hit that bell icon
for your latest notifications. With the doggos?
I'm so sorry, my babies. I'm so sorry.
Here is-
Yes, I see.
We see.
Ooh,
Good
there's
puppy.
Gracie, and then we have Peppy over here, little Parker now, and then we have security over there.
Oh, he's the security
Yeah.
dog. He here will kill you with hugs and cuddles. She offers nothing but love.